The first shot of gunfire cracked across the frozen railway yard before anyone even realized a fight had begun. Evelyn Harrow crouched behind a stack of wooden crates, her wool coat dusted with frost and her gloved hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the sudden, adrenaline-fueled panic. She pressed her back against the rough wood and tried to steady her breathing. Her dark chestnut hair, streaked with gray at the temples, framed a face hardened by 30 years of running her father's general store and keeping their small frontier town afloat. Her hazel eyes scanned the yard, catching every movement, every shadow. She had been walking to the train depot that morning to collect overdue payments from a shipment of lumber when she first noticed the chaos. 2 masked bandits had cornered the station master, waving pistols and yelling over the clatter of crates and wagons. The workers unloading the freight froze in terror, unsure whether to flee or fight. And then she saw him, a man moving like a shadow among shadows, his long black coat brushing the frost-covered ground, hair falling in loose. Midnight waves around his face. There was a stillness about him, a quiet precision, as if danger had been his constant companion. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. He carried no badge, no visible identification. Yet every movement radiated competence, danger, and an unspoken history she could almost feel radiating from him. The first bandit lunged, swinging a revolver with deadly intent, but the man sidestepped effortlessly, catching the assailant's wrist and twisting it until the gun clattered to the ice. With one fluid motion, he sent the second bandit sprawling across the ground. The scene played out like a nightmare and a dance at the same time, each motion measured, precise, and terrifying. Evelyn gasped involuntarily, and then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished into the thin morning mist beyond the tracks. Evelyn hesitated, torn between the instinct to run and the compulsion to follow. She stayed hidden until the station master, pale and trembling, emerged from behind his office. "Did you see him?" he asked in a trembling voice. "Yes," Evelyn said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I saw him, but he's gone now." "Who is he?" The station master shook his head. "No one knows. Some say he's a drifter who wanders the frontier, doing what he can to help, and sometimes hurt. Others say he's a wanted man, a ghost that surfaces only when someone's life hangs in the balance." Evelyn frowned, an unusual thrill stirring in her chest. There was something about this man, something beyond his skill or his mystery. A rawness, a sorrow that clung to him like smoke. And though she hadn't spoken a word to him, her curiosity felt like a living thing inside her, tugging at her relentlessly. By evening, the town of Blackridge buzzed with whispers. Evelyn, unable to contain herself, went from saloon to livery to general store, asking anyone she could find if they had seen or heard of him. Every story contradicted the last, some calling him a savior, others a killer, and a few even insisting he was both. Each tale only heightened her fascination. Meanwhile, on the far edge of town, in the shadow of jagged rock formations dusted with frost, the man had taken shelter. He removed his long black coat, revealing a lean, muscular frame adorned with tribal jewelry, a necklace of carved bone and turquoise, bracelets of braided leather, and a ring shaped like a coiled serpent. His long black hair hung damp from exertion, partially hiding the intensity in his dark eyes. His name was Kael, though he had long stopped introducing himself. He was a man shaped by loss and survival. Once a member of a nomadic tribe, he had wandered the frontier after his people were scattered and decimated by greed, betrayal, and disease. Each scar on his body was a story, a memory of a life stolen and rebuilt in shadows. He trusted no one, allowed no attachments, and lived with a self-imposed exile from human connection. But today, something had shifted. Today, he had stopped, not for money, not for vengeance, not even for justice, but for lives. And in doing so, he had unknowingly drawn Evelyn Harrow into his orbit. Evelyn returned home that night, the memory of his figure haunting her thoughts. She replayed every movement in her mind, the calm precision, the silent strength, the way he had seemed almost like a phantom stepping in to right the wrongs around him. She could not shake the feeling that their lives were somehow destined to intersect again, and that thought filled her both with dread and with an exhilarating sense of anticipation. The wind howled outside her window, rattling the panes, and the smell of wood smoke from the nearby bakery mingled with the crisp, cold air. Evelyn's dreams were restless. She dreamt of black-coated figures moving through mist and frost, of shadowy forests where she could barely catch sight of him, and of a river that reflected his eyes, dark and endless. She woke several times, her heart racing, her mind echoing with the memory of the gunfire, the cold, and the fleeting glimpse of Kael's face. The next morning, the snow lay thick on the streets of Blackridge, turning every footprint into a fragile trace of presence and absence. Evelyn walked to the depot again, hoping for some clue, some sign, some chance encounter. She was determined to learn more about him, who he was, why he had saved the lives of strangers, and why he had vanished so suddenly. As she passed the frozen tracks, she noticed something unusual: footprints leading into the forest that bordered the town. They were large, deep, and uneven, suggesting a heavy man moving swiftly over ice and snow. Her pulse quickened. She followed them cautiously, scanning the frost-covered trees and listening to the whisper of wind through the branches. After several minutes, she caught sight of him. Kael was crouched beside a small creek that had not yet frozen over, examining the water with a careful eye. He was removing his boots and wringing out his socks, the sun catching on his tribal jewelry. He hadn't noticed her yet. Evelyn's curiosity overcame her caution. She stepped closer, and a branch snapped under her foot. Kael's head snapped up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, neither of them moved, and the world seemed to hold its breath. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "It's not safe." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "I couldn't stay away. I had to see for myself. You? You're not like anyone I've ever known." Kael's jaw tightened. "You don't know the world I come from," he said, his tone a mixture of warning and weariness. "It's not a place for someone like you. Danger follows me like a shadow." Evelyn stepped closer, ignoring the icy chill that seeped through her coat. "Then let me help," she said, her voice unwavering. "If you face it alone, it'll be harder. But together." Kael studied her, his eyes dark pools of judgment and curiosity. For a long moment, he measured the weight of her resolve. And then, reluctantly, he nodded once. A subtle acknowledgment, almost imperceptible, that he recognized her bravery, her determination, and perhaps even her potential as an ally. The morning sun glinted off the creek, casting golden light across the frost, and for the first time in a long while, Kael allowed himself a measure of trust. The stranger who had entered Blackridge like a shadow, who had vanished like mist after the gunfire, had now been met by someone who refused to leave, someone whose presence stirred something within him he had long tried to bury. Evelyn returned to town that day with a renewed sense of purpose. She would find a way to stay connected to this man, to understand him, to help him if she could. There was something about Kael, something beyond the danger and mystery, that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. That evening, as the cold settled deep into Blackridge and the lights from the store glowed softly against the snow, Evelyn looked out the window and imagined the man moving through the forest beyond the tracks. Her thoughts swirled with questions, possibilities, and an undeniable sense of anticipation. The story of Kael and Evelyn had only just begun. and both their lives were poised to be forever changed by a meeting that had seemed like chance, but was, in some strange way, destined. In the quiet, frost-bitten night, Evelyn whispered to herself, "I will find him again." And for the first time, she felt that the frontier held not only danger but something rare and precious, the spark of connection that might just survive anything. The morning air smelled of smoke and pine as Evelyn rode toward the outskirts of Blackridge, the frozen ground crunching beneath her horse's hooves. A thin wisp of smoke curled from a distant logging camp atop the hills, mingling with the mist that clung to the trees. Her breath fogged in the cold, but her pulse pounded faster than the winter wind. She had heard from a frightened logger that Kael had been seen near the hills, helping with something, though exactly what, she could not yet determine. Her curiosity, mingled with a strange, reckless pull, had driven her here. She could not ignore him, not after the way he had saved lives at the railway yard. When she reached the edge of the hill, the chaos became immediately clear. Smoke rose in jagged columns from the partially collapsed structure of the old lumber mill. Logs teetered precariously, flames licking at the wooden beams, and a small group of men and women struggled to contain the blaze with buckets of water from a frozen creek. Panic had set in, and the sounds of shouting and splintering timber filled the air. Evelyn's heart leapt. And there, at the center of it all, moving with controlled precision, was Kael. He lifted beams and hauled trapped workers free with effortless strength. His dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes glinting with focus. Sweat mingled with soot on his face, but there was a calm in his movements that made him seem almost otherworldly, a force of nature rather than a man. Evelyn dismounted quickly, her boots crunching in the snow, and began helping wherever she could, shouting instructions, grabbing buckets, lending her strength to lift debris. Kael worked silently, methodically. Evelyn noticed the tribal jewelry glinting against his dark coat, the carved bone necklace, leather bracelets, and the turquoise ring that seemed almost ceremonial. He moved through danger like a predator, yet there was an element of compassion in the way he placed his hands under trapped workers or steadied the frightened. For the first time, she saw him not as a shadowy figure from a distance, but as a man who bore burdens beyond her understanding. One worker, a young man no older than 19, yelped as a beam shifted precariously. Kael was there in an instant, grabbing the timber just as it fell, his fingers cutting shallow lines into his palms but saving the youth. Evelyn gasped and ran to him, offering her hand. Kael's dark eyes met hers, and for a brief heartbeat, everything froze: smoke, fire, snow, even time itself. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, though exhaustion laced his voice. "It's dangerous." "I couldn't stay away," Evelyn replied. "I had to see you." "To help." Kael studied her for a moment, the weight of his gaze heavy. There was warning in his eyes, and yet there was something softer, something almost like relief that she had not run away. He nodded once, curtly, before turning his attention back to the fire. Together, they worked in silence, rescuing those trapped, guiding the frightened down the icy slope, and finally quelling the flames enough to prevent the hill from becoming a total loss. When the smoke had begun to clear and the last ember had been stomped out, Kael stood beside Evelyn, chest heaving, hands blackened with soot. "You're reckless," he said finally, almost as an afterthought. "But I appreciate it." Evelyn wiped her hands on her coat, heart still racing. "I'm not reckless. I couldn't let them suffer without trying." Kael's jaw tightened, and he turned away, staring at the burned hill. "There's a man," he said after a long pause. "Hawk, a bounty hunter. He doesn't care about money alone. He's after me. And anyone close is in danger." Evelyn's pulse quickened. She had suspected danger in following him this far, but hearing it confirmed made it real. She reached out, touching his arm gently. "Then let me stay. Let me help. We can face him together." Kael's gaze softened, though briefly, before hardening again. "You don't understand what you're asking. People like him, he has no mercy." "I understand more than you think," she said. "And I'm not going anywhere." There was a long silence, broken only by the distant crackle of dying embers. Finally, Kael nodded again, a subtle gesture of trust, a rare thing for a man who had spent most of his life running from people and danger alike. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills and cast long shadows across Blackridge, Evelyn and Kael returned to town. The streets were quiet, but whispers followed them. Residents had seen the smoke from the fire, and stories of the mysterious stranger and the courageous woman who aided him were already spreading. Evelyn did not care about the attention. She cared about Kael, and more importantly, about the trust they were slowly building. Over the next few days, Evelyn found herself drawn further into his world. She learned how Kael moved through the town without being noticed, how he listened to every sound, and how he observed everything with sharp, calculating eyes. He taught her small but crucial skills: how to notice unusual tracks in snow, how to predict the direction of someone following them, how to move silently across frozen ground. She absorbed everything eagerly, her respect and admiration for him growing with every lesson. One night, they sat on the roof of the general store, looking out at the snowy expanse of Blackridge, the town quiet beneath a sky filled with stars. Kael's hand brushed against hers almost accidentally. She did not pull away. "You're different," he murmured, his voice low. "Most people I've met either fear me or try to control me. You do neither." Evelyn smiled faintly, leaning a little closer. "Maybe I've learned that fear isn't always the right answer." Kael's eyes darkened. "It's not about fear. It's about survival. And survival has cost me more than I can bear." "I know," she whispered, "but you don't have to bear it alone anymore." He looked at her, and for the first time, Evelyn saw the faintest hint of vulnerability, something fragile hidden beneath the layers of skill, danger, and solitude. She felt a pang of longing, not just for the man he was, but for the man he could be with someone who trusted him. Their fragile peace was shattered a few days later when a new sign of Hawk's relentless pursuit emerged. A note, crude and threatening, had been left under the door of Evelyn's store. "Stop interfering, or you'll regret it." The handwriting was sharp and jagged, meant to intimidate. Kael read it silently, crumpling the paper in his hand. "They're clever," he muttered. "And ruthless. Hawk doesn't stop. We need a plan." Evelyn's heart pounded, but her resolve hardened. "Then let's make one together. I'm not leaving." Kael gave her a long look, dark eyes studying her expression, measuring her courage, her stubbornness, and her loyalty. At last he nodded. "All right," he said, "but you need to understand. Things will get dangerous. And I can't promise safety." "I never asked for safety," Evelyn said. "I asked to be with you. Whatever comes, I'll face it." That night, as snow drifted silently through the streets of Blackridge, Evelyn lay awake thinking about the fire on the hill, about Kael's quiet intensity, and about the pull she felt toward him, an attraction that was more than physical, more than curiosity. It was the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who had been shaped by loss, solitude, and the harshness of the frontier. Kael, meanwhile, moved through the town under the cover of darkness, scouting, observing, calculating every possible threat. He had never allowed himself to care for anyone, never allowed anyone close enough to notice the scars beneath his skin, yet Evelyn had breached the walls he had built. The thought both unsettled and comforted him. By the time the sun rose, casting pale light over the snow-covered streets, Kael and Evelyn were ready to act, to confront the dangers that awaited them, and to take the first steps in a partnership forged in courage, trust, and necessity. The days ahead promised uncertainty, danger, and perhaps even betrayal, but for the first time, both of them felt a flicker of hope. And in that fragile hope, a bond had begun to form, one that would challenge them, change them, and if they survived, perhaps give them something neither had dared to imagine, a chance at connection, at loyalty, and at love in a world that had been unforgiving for too long. The town of Blackridge had never felt so heavy. Snow covered every rooftop and street, muting sounds and creating a false sense of peace. But Evelyn sensed the tension beneath it, a quiet hum of danger that made her chest tighten. Kael moved beside her as they walked through the narrow streets, each of them alert to every creak of timber, every distant footstep. Hawk was here, she knew. He had arrived, and the threat that Kael had warned her about was now tangible, stalking them like a predator. The saloon doors creaked as they passed, and a few heads turned, whispers following their movements. Evelyn kept her hand near her satchel, fingers brushing the small revolver inside. She had learned how to use it under Kael's guidance, but even now, the weight of responsibility pressed against her shoulders. She was no longer just a bystander. She had chosen this life, and that choice carried consequences. Kael's eyes scanned the horizon constantly, dark and calculating. He moved with the quiet grace of a man who had spent his life tracking and being tracked. Every sound, every shadow, every movement registered in his mind. For all his skill, though, there was something different now, something softer. Something more human in the way he glanced at Evelyn from time to time. "You've changed," she said quietly as they moved past the frozen creek at the edge of town. "You're not the same as when I first met you." Kael's jaw tightened. "I've always been the same. I just don't let people see it." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I can see it, and I don't want to unsee it." He didn't answer, but his gaze lingered on her a moment longer than usual. The intimacy between them had grown quickly, unspoken but undeniable, forged through danger, trust, and shared moments of vulnerability. Evelyn felt it in every glance, every brush of their hands, every word that lingered between them. That night, as snow fell silently over the town, Evelyn prepared the store for the evening. Kael had insisted she stay inside while he scouted, but she refused to be left alone. She had grown into her courage, into the part of her that would stand beside him rather than hide. They sat together by the small wood stove, its light casting shadows across their faces. "Hawk won't stop," Kael said, his voice low, almost a growl. "He's patient, clever. He'll come at us when we least expect it." "I'm not afraid," Evelyn replied firmly. "And neither are you, really. You've faced worse than one man with a vendetta." Kael's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a long moment he stared into the fire, lost in memory. "Worse than this? Yes. But people, Evelyn, people I care about, they make it different. They make it dangerous in ways that even skill can't fix." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Then let me help you. I don't care about the danger. I care about you." The words hung in the air, soft but powerful. Kael's dark eyes softened briefly, the hardened edges of his face melting just enough for her to see the man behind the mystery. He nodded once, a silent agreement, though he didn't speak of the emotions that stirred inside him. Days passed and the tension in the town grew. Hawk's presence was felt even without seeing him, an invisible pressure. The way doors creaked open, the way shadows seemed to linger a second too long. Evelyn and Kael moved with careful strategy, watching for signs, listening for whispers. Evelyn had become skilled at reading the town, noticing subtle changes. A horse tied differently, a shutter left unlatched, a footprint in the snow that didn't belong. One evening, as they patrolled the outskirts, Kael spotted a figure moving at a distance, low and cautious. He crouched behind a snow-laden fence, signaling Evelyn to do the same. The figure paused and Kael's hand moved to the revolver at his hip, steady and precise. "That's him," Kael whispered. "Hawk." Evelyn swallowed, heart pounding, but she didn't flinch. She had trained for this, for moments like this, and she trusted Kael to guide them through. Hawk moved methodically, scanning the town and the surrounding snow-covered hills. His eyes were cold, calculating, and Evelyn felt a shiver of recognition. This was a man who would not rest, who would not relent until he had what he wanted. She glanced at Kael, whose dark eyes never left their target. There was no fear in him now, only determination, honed from years of surviving and escaping threats like this. Kael signaled and moved, silent as a shadow, leading Hawk into a trap they had prepared. The snow crunched underfoot, the only sound in the otherwise frozen silence. Evelyn followed closely, the weight of the small revolver in her hand grounding her. The confrontation came near the frozen river that ran along the edge of the town. The ice glinted under the pale moonlight, casting reflections that made the world feel unreal, almost dreamlike. Hawk froze as Kael stepped into view, calm, collected, the shadows of the trees framing him like a dark silhouette. "You've been following me," Kael said, voice steady, carrying across the ice. "Enough of this." Hawk's eyes narrowed. "I'm not done. You owe people, Kael, and I'm collecting." The fight began with Hawk striking quickly, a series of precise shots aimed to intimidate and wound. Kael moved like a predator, dodging, blocking, and disarming with skill honed over years of survival. The ice underfoot made every movement precarious, yet Kael was unshakable. Evelyn watched tense, knowing that any misstep could mean disaster. Finally, with a well-timed maneuver, Kael sent Hawk sprawling onto the ice. The man struggled, but Kael held him firmly, his dark eyes fierce, his jaw set. Evelyn ran forward, helping secure Hawk and ensuring he could not escape. For the first time, she saw Kael's expression soften not from mercy, but from relief that the immediate danger was over. Hawk glared up at them, defeated for now but unbowed. "This isn't over," he spat. "You'll regret this." Kael's gaze hardened. "Try me," he said simply, his voice as cold and unwavering as the winter night. Evelyn stepped closer to Kael, her hand brushing against his. The adrenaline of the confrontation still thrummed through her veins, but the relief of survival mingled with something deeper, a recognition that they had faced a threat together and emerged stronger as they returned to town. The silence between them was heavy but comfortable. Neither needed to speak. The shared experience had strengthened the bond that had begun weeks earlier. Evelyn realized that her life had changed in ways she had never anticipated. She had gone from an observer, a cautious woman guarding her own heart, to a participant in a dangerous, thrilling, and profoundly human story. Kael, too, felt the shift. Evelyn had proven herself not just capable but loyal, brave, and unflinching in the face of danger. He had never allowed himself to rely on anyone, to let anyone close, but she had found her way past his defenses. He didn't know if he would ever stop being haunted by his past, by the ghosts of his lost tribe, by the betrayals that had shaped him. But he did know this. He could trust her. And that trust was priceless. The town of Blackridge slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though the memory of the fire on the hill and the confrontation at the river lingered. Evelyn and Kael moved carefully, aware that Hawk would not give up easily. But they also moved with confidence, the knowledge that together they were stronger, that together they could face whatever came next. One night, as snow drifted silently across the rooftops, Evelyn sat by the stove in the general store. Kael leaned against the doorframe, watching her, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "You've changed me," he said softly, almost to himself. Evelyn looked up, startled. Changed you? Yes, he admitted. I've spent years running, hiding, trusting no one. And now I can't imagine being alone. You've made that impossible. Evelyn smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. And you've changed me too. I was cautious, afraid of things I couldn't control. But now I've learned that sometimes the only way to survive and live is to face danger head on, with someone you trust. Kael's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. He stepped closer, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a moment of peace. Evelyn didn't speak. She simply reached for his hand, holding it firmly, their fingers entwined. The cold of the snow outside seemed distant, irrelevant. They had survived fire, threat, and the relentless pursuit of a man who would not quit. And through it all, they had found something rare in the unforgiving frontier: trust, partnership, and a connection that neither time nor danger could sever. The winter night stretched on, quiet and still, and for the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to hope. Hope that they could survive what was to come. Hope that Hawk's shadow would not always loom over them. And hope that Kael, mysterious, dangerous, and endlessly compelling, was the man she could count on. In every sense of the word. And in that hope, a fragile promise was made, not in words, but in glances, in touches, and in the shared understanding that they were no longer alone. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The morning air was crisp and still, the kind of silence that seemed to hold its breath, as if the world itself was waiting. Snow sparkled under the rising sun, covering Blackridge in a pristine, deceptive calm. Evelyn stepped carefully along the frozen railway tracks, her boots crunching softly in the frost. Kael walked beside her, tall and alert, his dark eyes scanning the horizon, hands brushing the leather straps of his pack. For the first time in days, there was no immediate danger, but neither of them trusted the quiet. Hawk was still out there, and Kael had taught her the hard lesson that a lull often preceded storm. They reached the edge of the tracks where the frozen river reflected, the early light like shattered glass. Evelyn stopped and looked at Kael. He had removed his long black coat, revealing the lean, muscular frame she had come to admire, the tribal jewelry around his neck and wrists catching the sunlight. There was a solemn grace to him, a mixture of strength and quiet sorrow that drew her in more than she had expected. "You ready?" Kael asked, voice low but steady. Evelyn nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." They had spent days preparing for the inevitable, gathering supplies, learning to read tracks in the snow, and anticipating Hawk's moves. It was no longer a matter of if he would strike, but when. Kael's hand brushed hers, and she felt the warmth and reassurance in that simple gesture. They had been through fire, snow, and near death, and through it all, the bond between them had grown unbreakable. It was mid-morning when Hawk finally appeared, riding fast along the ridge above the town. His horse's hooves kicked up snow, and his dark eyes scanned for Kael. The sight of him made Evelyn's stomach tighten, but she did not flinch. Kael's hand found hers again, gripping firmly. "He's come," Kael murmured. "We end this today." The confrontation took place near the frozen river's edge, where jagged ice jutted like broken teeth from the surface. Hawk dismounted, a cruel smirk on his face, and Kael stepped forward, unflinching, his dark hair falling over his forehead. Evelyn stayed slightly behind him, ready to act, ready to protect. She had trained under Kael's guidance and knew her instincts would be sharp, but she trusted him to lead. "You've been running long enough, Kael," Hawk said, voice carrying across the ice. "I've been patient, but patience ends here. You can't hide forever." Kael's eyes narrowed. "I'm not hiding, and I'm not alone." His gaze shifted to Evelyn. Hawk's smirk faltered slightly as he realized she was no longer just a bystander. She had become a part of Kael's world, a presence he refused to abandon. The fight began with Hawk striking quickly, revolver raised, aimed with deadly precision. Kael moved with almost preternatural grace, dodging and deflecting with a mix of skill and instinct. Evelyn watched, heart pounding, feeling the danger as if it were a living thing pressing against her chest. Yet she was not powerless. She moved carefully, positioning herself to assist if necessary. Carrying a small revolver Kael had trained her to use, snow crunched underfoot, and the icy river reflected their movements in jagged, fractured images. Kael's movements were fluid and precise, disarming Hawk, sending his gun skidding across the ice. Evelyn's breath caught as Hawk lunged, but Kael was ready, his dark eyes never leaving the man who had haunted their lives for weeks. With one swift maneuver, Hawk slipped on the ice and sprawled onto the frozen surface. Helpless for the first time in the chase, Evelyn stepped forward, placing a hand on Kael's arm. "It's over," she whispered. Kael didn't answer immediately. He studied Hawk, who struggled to rise, fury and fear flashing in his eyes. Finally, Kael spoke, voice cold and unwavering. "It's over. Leave this town, or you'll not walk away again." Hawk glared at them, silent but seething. He seemed to weigh his options, calculating. Before finally retreating to his horse and riding away, a cloud of snow and dust behind him. Evelyn exhaled, relief flooding through her, but also a deep awareness of how close they had come to disaster. Kael turned to her, and for the first time in weeks, his shoulders relaxed. "You're safe," he said, and there was no edge to his voice, only honesty. Evelyn smiled, a mix of relief and emotion rising in her chest. "We did it, together." They walked back to the town slowly, the weight of tension lifting, replaced by the quiet thrill of survival and victory. Blackridge had not seen the end of danger, but for now, the shadow of Hawk had lifted. Evelyn and Kael returned to the general store, the place that had been her anchor, where warmth and light met the cold snow outside. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and cast long shadows across the rooftops, Kael and Evelyn sat together near the wood stove. Kael's hand found hers again, fingers entwining naturally, a silent testament to the bond that had grown through weeks of peril and shared struggle. "You've changed everything," Kael said softly, voice low enough for only her to hear. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "And you've changed me. I used to think I could handle anything on my own, but now I know. I don't want to face the world alone." Kael's dark eyes softened, and he reached up to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. "I never thought I could care for anyone again. Not like this, but you've proven me wrong." The room seemed to shrink around them, the cold and the outside world falling away, leaving only the warmth of shared triumph and trust. For the first time in decades, Kael allowed himself a measure of peace, a chance to imagine a life beyond running, hiding, and surviving. Evelyn felt the same, the weight of fear replaced with the exhilarating promise of possibility. Days passed, and life in Blackridge slowly returned to normal. The townspeople went about their routines, and the whispers of the mysterious stranger who had saved the town gradually softened into admiration and curiosity. Evelyn reopened her store fully, managing the shipments and accounts, but now with Kael occasionally by her side, helping and protecting, a presence that felt natural rather than extraordinary. Kael began to engage more with the townsfolk, though carefully, and Evelyn noticed a subtle change in him, moments of humor, flashes of tenderness, and even a willingness to allow small connections. The man who had once existed in shadows was learning, slowly, how to live among people again. Guided by trust and love, one morning, as the sun rose over Blackridge, Painting the snowy streets with soft gold, Evelyn and Kael walked along the railway tracks, the place where their story had begun. Kael stopped, turning to face her, the wind tousling his dark hair and catching the glint of his tribal jewelry. "I never thought I'd find someone I could trust," he said, voice low, steady. "Someone who doesn't fear who I am or what I've done." Evelyn smiled, reaching for his hand. "And I never thought I'd find someone worth staying for. Someone who makes the world feel safer just by being in it." Kael's lips curved into a faint, genuine smile. He pulled her close, and together they looked out over the town, the frozen tracks stretching into the horizon. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and smoke. The snow glimmered like 1,000 tiny diamonds, and for the first time in a long while, Kael allowed himself to imagine a future not dictated by survival, but by choice, by love. Evelyn rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the strength and warmth of the man who had once been a shadow, a stranger, and now was the center of her world. Kael kissed her forehead, a silent promise that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The town of Blackridge would continue its quiet life, unaware of the battles fought in the snow, the fires extinguished or the dangers averted. But for Evelyn and Kael, every moment of survival had led to this, a bond forged in peril, a trust hard-earned, and a love rare and enduring. They walked hand in hand, side by side, knowing that the frontier would always be unpredictable, but for the first time, it felt like they had found a home not just in a place, but in each other. And in that love, Evelyn discovered a treasure worth more than any gold or land. And Kael found something he had thought lost forever, a reason to stop running, a reason to hope, and a reason to stay. As the sun set behind the hills, casting long golden shadows across the snow, they paused, looking out over the railway tracks where chance and destiny had first brought them together. The cold wind swept past, but it could not touch them, not now. Evelyn and Kael had survived the storms of their past, faced the dangers of the present, and found in each other a wealth beyond measure. The frontier was wild, unforgiving, and full of uncertainty, but they had each other. And in that bond, they had everything.